We would be honoured if you would join us.
Hello, this is Simon from Film Stories, and in this video I want to have a conversation really about where on earth has James Bond 007 gone? Because at the moment I'm recording this, we're in September of 2024. That means it's 3 years this month since the film No Time to Die came out in cinemas. No Time to Die, you might recall, was originally set to be released, well, originally back at the end of 2019, then it was delayed until, well, basically slapped back just at the start of the pandemic. Delayed several times, not back to September 2021, but it does mean a James Bond film hasn't been shooting since early 2019 now. That it was well known with No Time to Die that Daniel Craig was hanging up his tuxedo for good, and that the Bond franchise was going to go in a different direction afterwards. So filming wrapped up 2019. Now we are 5 years later, 3 years since the release of the last film, and why? Where's Bond gone? Why is it now taking so long to make a James Bond film? We look at other franchises, cinematic universes that manage to get a production line that turns films round. A 2-year gap between them. Bond used to be like, it was the forerunner really. Bond films were coming out every 2 years at one stage. Then the gap got longer and longer and longer. Previously, the biggest gap we had was, it was from 1989's License to Kill to 1995's Goldeneye, a 6-year gap. And the reason for that was a lot of legal shenanigans that were going on behind the scenes, that there had been plans for a third Timothy Dalton film, a James Bond film at one stage. That didn't happen, but it was the legalities really and just rights models that just slowed things down. Now, should a James Bond film start filming tomorrow, which, exclusive, it will not, then the earliest it would be in cinemas would be at the end of 2025. So that's already, a fairly weighty 4-year gap. So we're not quite at the record. We were pretty much at the record when, with the gap between Spectre and No Time to Die, but there was a pandemic at the heart of this. In this case, though, it's curious that we're waiting so long when it was very well known that Bond was going to have to undergo some degree of reinvention. It was known when they started shooting that Daniel Craig wasn't going to make another James Bond film. And here we are, 6 years after that, with still no sign of another James Bond. That Aaron Taylor-Johnson appears to be the running favourite at the moment. At the point this is being videoed as well, he's been fairly recently recorded in posh gear and looking very Bond-like, and that's done nothing to dampen the claims and the suggestions that he's the next Bond. But also Eon Productions, which is basically where the buck stops with Bond, has always played its cards really close to its chest, that it refuses to confirm speculation of a director, of a title, of an actor until it is firmly ready to do so. So in November of this year, the guardians of the James Bond saga, Michael G. Wilson and primarily Barbara Broccoli, are getting a special award in November. I think it's the Irving Schallberg Award. And there is a suggestion that at that point, that might be their opportunity to tell us where Bond is going. But also, I think the elephant in the room here has, to a degree, been Amazon. That Amazon, since No Time to Die went into production, has acquired MGM. Now, the MGM studio is a part stakeholder in the James Bond saga, and so it has some degree of say in the midst of that as well. And you might recall during the pandemic, there were stages where it looked like there were at least conversations that No Time to Die would be going direct to streaming. That when loads of blockbusters were being sold to the likes of Netflix and Amazon and Apple, that Bond was like the crown jewels, the one that was being held back for cinema along with Christopher Nolan's Tenet movie. And Barbara Broccoli, Michael G. Wilson were fairly insistent at that stage. Now we've had, since Amazon took on MGM, we've had one James Bond production, which is the TV show that Amazon did with Brian Cox, just kind of like a game show really. Still no sign of a film. There is a suggestion, and I have no inside knowledge on this, but there is a suggestion that it's kind of working out how James Bond works when Amazon is one of your financial stakeholders, because Amazon would want a flow of material. The TV show, would that have happened had Amazon not bought MGM? Not entirely sure it would. For old video game nerds, it kind of reminded me when the vintage game production company Bullfrog knocked out a racing game in 6 weeks just because all of their other titles were taking so long to do. And so I'm not suggesting that that particular TB enterprise was quickly turned around, far from it, in fact. But I do wonder if there's a degree of placating some of the new money in terms of put that show on the air, and then we've got a bit more time to work the films out. What I think is fairly certain is that Eon Productions will only do this when, by the time we get the announcement, it will pretty much all be in place. So if you go back to the way Spectre and Skyfall were announced, there was a lavish presentation that announced the title of the film, confirmed lots of the cast, confirmed the director, etc., etc. And then 2 days later, they were filming. And so, it was all fairly secretive to that point. There had been rumours of a title. There'd been rumours that pre-production work, that some even second unit early filming had been getting underway. We've not had that many rumours even of that this time around. The rumours that we're having, we're still at the stage of who's going to direct the film, and a few candidates. Some really interesting candidates coming up. There was quite a lot of clickbait. I might have written some of it myself about a year ago that Christopher Nolan was being spoken to, but Christopher Nolan wields too much power. He would want Final Cut. He's earned Final Cut across his filmmaking career, and the Bond producers are never going to give Final Cut. Remember when Steven Spielberg was going to make the first Harry Potter film, and it just wasn't going to happen because he wouldn't cede Final Cut to J.K. Rowling. He would want the Final Cut over the movie. In the case of Bond, you're working within a friendly ecosystem, but it's technically, in a weird way, they're made as massive independent movies, huge independent movies. So the directors who are currently in line, well, there's a story that spiked up just over the last day or two that Eon is meeting directors. I think it popped up in the Telegraph here in the UK. Meeting directors with a possible view of them taking it on, and some of the names on the list. Possibly the most interesting one is Edward Berger, who directed the recent take on All Quiet on the Western Front, which turned into an Oscar frontrunner for Netflix. As a surprise to Netflix, that was really terrific film, that is. He's currently, just doing the festival circuit with his new film Conclave. Now, the early signs from the festival circuit are that Conclave is going to attract a lot of awards attention. That will thus take up a lot of Edward Berger's time till February of next year with all the Oscar and BAFTA campaigning. So is he a candidate? Almost certainly so. The rumours seem fairly strong there. Will he fit into the timescale of what Eon wants to do? Well, who knows what that timescale is. Another name in the mix is Kelly Marcel. Now, she's written screenplays for the likes of 50 Shades of Grey and Saving Mr. Banks, but I think more for the purposes of this, she's the director of Venom: The Last Dance, which is on the eve of the release as this video is being recorded. She is also said to be a candidate in the midst of it. Bart Layton's name has been mentioned. Jan de Mange was mentioned for a while. I think even Martin Campbell has been thrown back into the mix. Martin Campbell has rebooted Bond twice, with Goldeneye in 1995, and particularly spectacularly with 2006's Casino Royale, which I think is probably my favourite Bond film, at least until about the last 10 minutes. And so someone who can do that might just lead them to Martin Campbell's door. There's a rumour going around too that what Amazon is looking for is, once it's sorted the reboot of Bond, that we're not waiting 4 or 5 years between films, that once you've got it, let's work out when the next 3 or 4 films are going to come along. That once you've cast a Bond, just press ahead now, and that it's kind of willing to bide its time and just have a little bit of extra space now for whatever the next iteration of 007 on the big screen is going to be, and thus take it from there. That once you've got one film going, the same way Pierce Brosnan was launched really, and you had Tomorrow Never Dies 2 years after that, and you had The World Is Not Enough 2 years after that. I'm not sure they can quite get that pace, but certainly they can accelerate it on the stretch of the Daniel Craig era, where the gaps between the films were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Then there, I mean, you've got who is going to be James Bond, and so the announcement of everything I would expect to come relatively closely together. But let's realistically work this out. Say in November that Broccoli and Wilson, when they're collecting their award, announce, yeah, we've got this Bond, we've got a script for it. We don't know if they've got a script for it. Here's the director. Here's the Bond, let's go. The earliest now they could turn that round, as I said before, would be for a release in autumn 2025. And that's already assuming the locations have been booked and scouted, that a lot of pre-production work is underway. My guess is it's more likely that we'll see movement on James Bond by the end of the year, but a confirmation of start of filming is looking on the ambitious side. The one thing that might work in favour of us seeing 007 on the big screen quicker is once they fire the starting gun, the way these films are produced is almost unlike any other blockbuster in that if you look at something like Spectre, when they announced the start of production on Spectre, they just went for it. So I think it started production, didn't it? Something like January 2015, wrapped up production, and it was in cinemas like 9 months later, which, when you consider just what a massive enterprise the film is, I mean, a staggering turnaround. I do think Spectre suffers a little bit for that. And I remember talking to Sam Mendes. I interviewed him around the time of that, and he was saying like the film was finished 3 days before the first press screening of it, and just over a week before the actual premiere of the movie. What Spectre didn't have was editing time built in, really, that they finished shooting 3 months later, it was on the big screen. I do this parallel a lot. If you go back to Mad Max Fury Road, George Miller's movie, it took them basically 3 months to sift through all the footage, never mind edit it, just to watch and assess what they've got. There's a lot of time built in for pre-production on Bond. There's a lot of time built in for production as well. These films regularly pass the 100-day club. Quite rare that films shoot for more than 100 days now. Bond films tend to. Post-production, a lot more truncated, even appreciating that they edit and build the films as they go along as well, and that there is an army of people working on these. So my question at the start, where has James Bond gone? And ultimately, when might we see Bond? The earliest we could see a new Bond film is about 13 months from now, I think, and that was if they fired the starting gun right away. Likely 2026, I would guess. And I think when you get an announcement, you will get the lot. You'll get the director, you'll get the Bond, you'll get the release date, you might even get the title at that stage. And then, it will just be a frantic year of set photos and rumours and things like that. So once it's going, it's going. What will be interesting after that is what the Bond film after James Bond 27 looks like, and how built in that is, how closely knitted that is to James Bond 26. Bond got close to this with the Daniel Craig era, when Casino Royale was very, very close to Quantum of Solace story-wise. I mean, one led directly into another. That's not happened before on the big screen with Bond. Then you got, as various rights to things came back to Eon Productions, quite a lot of retrofitting, and the feeling that a narrative arc had been squeezed across the 5 films, even though it didn't necessarily fit. And also, even though it hadn't really been conceived with Casino Royale, I don't think they knew when they made Casino Royale what No Time to Die, what direction that was going to go in. But still, here is an opportunity for a proper full-on reset. They've certainly bought themselves the time, and they've bought themselves the space, and they've got the power really to do it. I think the fact that Eon, that even a company as powerful as Amazon can't do anything without Eon on side. And so Eon is throwing this protective ring around 007. And so at the point it's ready to go, everyone's got to be on board, and it will move at speed. Meanwhile, here we are about to mark 3 years since No Time to Die was on the big screen, the longest James Bond film to date as well, we should note, with an ending that I won't spoil here, but cast like a shadow over where 007 goes next. Thing is, a lot of radio silence, not a lot of fact. Hopefully that's going to be changing in the months ahead.